Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. Today we are continuing our push to get the Gallardo ready and fit for purpose as a backup car should the NSX need a maintenance cycle or have to be kind of rotated out for track duty at some point during the year. And that kind of is a loose goal, is to have this car on track at some point in 2022 and have it do so gracefully and successfully. Now to do that, I've been taking care of a little maintenance, or catching up on a little maintenance that I've been kind of deferring as we did all of the things with the NSX in the last half of 2021 after its big maintenance cycle in the spring. In the last video, you will have seen me replace the radiator fans, which for one or more reasons had both stopped working at some point in time and were causing the car to kind of begin to head towards overheating if you stood still for any amount of time. Having corrected that now with both new fans in place and functional, while I had the car up in the air and the wheel off, I thought I would tackle one other very common Gallardo nuisance problem, and that is the brake warning lamp on the dashboard. The lamp isn't the problem, obviously. It's what leads to the errant display of a brake pad warning. Now, these cars have a kind of clever but poorly executed brake pad thickness sensor system in them. It's basically, in simplest terms, it's one wire that goes around and goes through all four sets of brake pads, obviously by various connectors and pigtails, but it's one circuit. And then if a brake pad gets low enough, it wears through a wire that shows then an open in the circuit. The computer reads the open in the circuit and displays a warning on the dashboard telling the driver that his brake pads may have gotten too thin and should be inspected at their earliest convenience. Now, the problem is, though, some 200 IQ engineer somewhere decided that the best way to set this up, on the pre-LP Gallardos anyway, was to literally zip tie a wire to an upper control arm in a place where it's going to bend every time the wheel moves. Now on the front of the car, the wheels tend to move quite often because you steer with them. And what happens then when you have a wire that is held in place rigidly at one point and then you move it a whole bunch back and forth? Well, yeah, it eventually breaks. And then you have a false signal telling you that your brake pads are thin when you can distinctly show with Exhibit A here that our brake pads are nowhere near thin enough to elicit any kind of warning. There's probably well more than half the pad thickness left at this point. Now, having done some reading, there are definitely some very specific places where you can go and look for this error, and ways that you can kind of electrically determine if this is your problem or not, I guess. And also there's a couple of different ways of fixing it. But first things first, let's get our head in a wheel well, and I will show you where you can look for this problem in kind of the cause, if you will. Here we have our left front brake caliper and rotor. And back behind this, you can see right there the wire that connects the sensors to the car harness. I'm going to zoom in on that so you can see what I'm talking about here. And right there you can see the zip tie that holds it to the control arm. So what happens then is, obviously this whole wheel and caliper and rotor assembly moves back and forth like this when the car steers, and that moves this back and forth with it against this zip tie here, which is fixed in place. Now, if this were the NSX, just saying, this would be a rubber grommet with some stress reliefs on both sides in the wire harness there that would kind of prevent that level of crimping that we're seeing right here. You can see even where the sheathing is kind of flattened out and it has some abrasion in it at the spot where it's been moved back and forth, so much. This car has 70-something thousand miles, or not quite 70,000 miles on it rather, which again is, in comparison to the NSX with 300-something thousand miles, and I think the closest equivalent I can think of on that car would be the wheel speed sensors. And those will, the sensors wear out on those before the wiring harnesses do, and that doesn't even happen until over 200,000 miles typically. So This is where you're going to look, though, for your failure. It's probably not up here in the caliper. It's probably not in the brake pads. It could be, but it's probably not. It's probably right here, especially if your car has any appreciable miles on it. You know, I don't know when that starts to happen with Gallardos, but I know I've seen seen people writing in and asking questions on internet and on the forums and stuff with, you know, only 20, 30,000 miles on the car, but they've still had this issue. So it may be it may depend on some factors. But, so that's where we're going to look. We're going to inspect that because we know that we're having this problem. So I'm going to cut this sheath off here and we're going to see what we see. All right, so we've switched sides here of the car, but the point remains. Again, you've got the zip tie up here. I've kind of pulled this out a little bit, and sliced this sheath lengthways. And we can see in here we have a couple of wires that are connected, but we have a couple that definitely aren't. And in spite of what that looks like, I did not cut these, and there are two other ends back in here somewhere to those wires. You can see the other one starting to kind of crimp through there. So here's the other end of one of those wires back in here. But this, I suspect, I mean, that's as far as having a quick payoff, you know. I didn't find anything with my smoke test, but I found something right away with this quick check. Now, there are effectively two ways that you can fix this. Those two ways are, one, actually fixing the system and either resoldering the wires. I don't know what the dealership would call for here. Maybe to replace the wires leading up there. I don't know where they connect back in the into the rest of the harness, or if those are actually run straight to the other side, and there's like a length of wire that you could replace across from this side to that side, perhaps, which would take care of both front wheels, which I believe is the only place you're really going to see this issue. The rear suspension and rear wheels, obviously, they don't have there's no rear steer on this car. So they're only dealing with a little bit of up and down movement and not the significant side-to-side motion that has clearly caused the the directional crimp in the sheathing on the fronts. So you could replace the wire, you could solder it back together. The third option, I guess, now we've covered two options, so general options. One, actually fix it. Two is to just take the ends of the wires that are loose there on the car side and just connect those two together, just short them together. And that way that shows the computer what it wants to see, which is a closed circuit, and will get rid of your warning light. And then the only caveat then is you can't be a filthy casual anymore, and you're going to have to take your eyeballs and look at your brake calipers or brake pads every now and again to confirm that they still have material left on them and are safe to use. That's how it's always been done, and that's how I've always done it on all the rest of my cars, so I don't see a problem with doing it that way. But for the sake of being able to tell some future owner that, yeah, that safety system works, I'm going to at least explore how hard it looks like it's going to be to either run new wires all the way across or solder these back together. The problem with soldering them back together is you're creating another rigid point in a wire that's probably just going to, lead to another break in the future, and then you're going to have to make the same decision all over again, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go stick my head under here, take a look, have a think, and I will get back to you with which direction we go forward. All right, folks, we've got our repair underway. Please ignore my hideous but secure soldering joints here. But you can see what I've done here is, in addition, I haven't just connected the broken pieces here and here back together, but I've also added a section in between. So offline or off camera, I talked to someone who services Lamborghinis as a profession, thanks to Raj with Supercar Service UK for the advice here. And he said it's not only the fact that it gets flexed a whole bunch, but also the fact that the inboard length here is actually shorter than what it should be. And so if you have full steering lock turned this way, this gets pulled tight. In addition to the fact that it's been worked back and forth, it then gets pulled on and causes the failures. So his advice was to, there's not really you can't replace a section of harness or something, there's no updated part number, but he's had good success in just adding some length to the wires and then soldering them back together, and then hopefully they won't get tugged on as much. Now I have a feeling this probably happens with these wires, which are smaller, appear anyway, smaller gauge. So we've got a solid green and a solid black, solid green and a solid black, get my thumb out of the way. And then up here we have a brown and green and a green and brown, green with a brown stripe, brown with a green stripe wires that appear thinner gauge, and that's where my failure happened. I don't see any particular stress in these other two, but I guess we'll find out once I get everything reconnected and go for a drive if that has cured the problem or not. But I'm going to continue butchering some solder joints here real quick. All right, well, after some subsequent soldering, a little bit of electrical tape, and some zip ties, we have completed our repair here. Now, hopefully this was a pretty obvious smoking gun, I felt, so my hope is that this will cure my errant brake warning lamp display, and hopefully last a little bit longer than the original did. Now, one thing I did do is I replaced this zip tie, so all of this was a zip tie that goes through a little screw with a slot in it up here. And I noted on the other side, on the left side of the car, this was a little looser than it was on this side. This side it was pretty well cinched down on the cord, such that you couldn't really move it back and forth through the middle of the zip tie. On the other side, it was a little looser, and on the other side we hadn't had the same issue of breakage and the wires didn't look as stressed. So my theory is here that if I leave this able to move a little bit, it will lessen the strain on our repair and also lessen the strain on the untouched wires in here that were not broken, such that they don't hopefully break in the future. But that is what we have done. Hopefully this has been a useful walkthrough of where to at least look for this problem, even if you don't decide to tackle it yourself one direction or the other. But for now, we are going to skip forward probably a day or two, because it's white and frozen outside right now, to the hopeful payoff of driving the car without a brake lamp light on. Alright folks, well, we've been out for a drive and gotten the car, warm enough to confirm that our fans worked, and you've already seen that. But now we've also kind of used the brakes intermittently in different ways, done some hard stops, done some kind of gentle stops, turned in some kind of tight turns and stuff like that as well. And so far so good. We still have no brake warning on our dash for wherever I can't remember what the message was, like brake wear warning light or message. I guess it's a message. It's not a light anymore because it's actually printed out for you. But we don't have any of that. So in our previous adventure, having the ECU reprogrammed so the car doesn't think it's European anymore and isn't expecting its marker lights to flash, and now having fixed a broken wire up in the right front, to remind myself because it's the next day, but fixed the wire in the right front. We now have no brake wear warning either. We have a clear dash in this Gallardo, folks. The first time in my ownership, thank goodness. It's also been on its best behavior today. I did try and do like the third gear pull that usually makes it stumble, but you know, she must have been feeling neglected because she's on her best behavior, so fingers crossed, but I'm not expecting much with that. We'll probably have to tackle it later. But for now, thanks for watching. I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World. I'll see you guys all in the next video, if not out at the track.